Is the traditional employee model broken? Remote work, AI, global talent pools, we're watching borders around work dissolve. But behind the scenes, the complexity hasn't gone away. It's actually multiplied. So are we building a borderless workforce or just a more complicated one? To help unpack that question, I'm joined by somebody who's spent his career at the intersection of global talent and workforce strategy. Jim McCoy is the CEO of Atlas HXM, a company helping businesses onboard, manage, and pay employees around the world, all while navigating real-world complexities of global compliance. Jim brings more than 2 decades of experience in workforce strategy and talent solutions. Before leading Atlas, he served as Senior Vice President of Enterprise Solutions at Manpower, where he worked with some of the largest employers in North America to design and implement large-scale talent strategies. Early in his career, he helped build one of the world's largest recruitment process outsourcing businesses, and he's led his organizations through challenges of scaling talent across borders, markets, and economic cycles. So when we talk about the idea of truly borderless workforce, Jim has seen that transformation from the inside out. Welcome, Jim, to Business Uncomplicated.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So welcome, Jim, to Business Uncomplicated.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks, Andy. It's great to be here with you both.
So it's great to have you on the podcast. We want to start with your background. So, we met, so long ago at Bank Boston, and you were in banking, and you've kind of evolved your career over the years, now as CEO of Atlas. So talk about that progression and how you got to where you did. Was it intentional? Did you always want to be a CEO? Did you always want to be in talent recruiting strategy?
Well, it's a great question, Rich, and thank you for that opener. It's funny because you really dated us by mentioning Bank Boston, which hasn't been around for about 25 years. So I appreciate that for the listeners who are at a younger generation and who might not even have known that organization even existed. But happily, it brought us together many years ago. I started my career in banking kind of unwittingly. I went through a campus recruiting process, ended up at the Chase Manhattan Bank, another organization that does exist, but maybe just with not with the same name. Over time, I can't say I was super deliberate about career planning, but what I did was focus on what are the experiences that I don't have and what is the best way to get them. And so I started in the banking and payments and global treasury business. I then moved into outsourcing, BPO and IT outsourcing. And then from there, it was really a natural transition into human capital. So I started with a division of Fidelity Investments that was in the staffing business and wanted to start recruitment outsourcing. And then ultimately was hired by Manpower Group to lead that recruitment outsourcing business. Fast forward to today, did I ever think that I would be a CEO? Not necessarily, but sometimes fate gives you opportunities to put all of your collective knowledge to work, and that's basically what happened with Atlas.
I can honestly say all of us who've known you all these years are not surprised.
Well, thank you.
So you're now CEO of Atlas, and you're driving a lot of strategic initiatives. So let's talk about that.
Give us an overview of Atlas. I was on your website and looking at human experience management. Unpack that for us. What does that mean for your customers?
Sure. So Atlas is in the business of, we're what's called an employer of record. We operate entities in 164 locations. And what that enables our clients to do is if they want to expand into a particular market, they don't have a legal entity to do so, they can hire via Atlas. The reason we call it human experience management is if you think about the workforce that we put to work for our clients, they're generally a single individual working all alone in a country that's a long way away from the head office. Or oftentimes they're also expats. We sponsor visas in 85 countries for individual to support global mobility for our clients. And so what we wanted to make sure was that the platform and the services around the platform supported that individual's ability to be successful and a growing employee, almost what I would consider to be an employer, an extension of being of a company that wants to be an employer of choice in a market where they don't actually have a presence. And so when we think about human experience management, it's about how does the client experience us for one, but more importantly, how does that worker experience it? How do they feel supported when they have urgent needs? Are they attended to with knowledgeable experts? And that's been absolutely fundamental to Atlas since its founding, and really to this day as well.
So for you as the employer of record, then do you provide the HR services and all that, or do you just kind of provide, like, so do they call you guys when there's an issue, or do they call their employer?
They call us. So we actually, it's a really interesting model in that I have 300 team members that work in 39 countries, collectively speak over 90 languages.
Wow.
And so that we're able to support an employee in the time zone with someone who's knowledgeable about the region that they're working in, really with any sort of HR issue they would have. Now, if you think about it, that's not simply sign me up for payroll and benefits.
Right.
On a regular basis, we get requests for, can you provide me proof of employment because I'm applying for a mortgage? Can you help me fill out a credit form because I'm looking to buy a car? There are all sorts of things that go along with being an employee of Atlas in a market where maybe the home employer or the kind of our client is not as well known. So therefore it makes some of the other life transactions a little bit more challenging for people.
So for these people that you hire, they're working in this country because there's a need for that employer to have it, or are you guys helping connect rare skill sets? Or is it about expanding into a specific country?
It's all of the above, Rich. Okay. And this is what's really interesting about the business and why I am so happy I found myself in it. The use cases are really a wide variety, but primarily they focus around a few things. I'm a company that manufactures a good or provides a service, and I need a sales team, or I need consultants, or I need someone in a market, either on a temporary basis or on a long-term basis, to be able to support a client set that I have there. So, importers, exporters. We have a lot of NGO clients. They basically we could be supporting the work that they do with all sorts of different roles in markets where they don't have a permanent establishment, but they have the need to be there to support their work. Talent shortage is also a critical one, and access to key scarce skills. So a lot of our clients say in the technology companies or pharmaceutical companies, they might be looking for like a scientist that has an exactly specific skill set and need the ability to employ them where they live. And the other thing is that a lot of employers are willing to support an individual's mobility, especially those who have not been so focused on return to office and are much more focused on kind of life quality for an individual. And so we do have a lot of kind of general employees that just happen to live outside of the country of origin of our particular client.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm wondering, Jim, it's super interesting, both from the employer's perspective and from the employee's perspective as well. I'm wondering, if we think about the, culture strategy for breakfast, how does employee experience really translate as you go international and go globally? Is it fundamentally different country to country, or how are some of your companies keeping that culture experience that is so valuable to what they do and who they are?
It's a great question, Andy. So oftentimes our clients will hire someone through us, and it might be their first exposure to how business actually happens in a particular country. And so it's really incumbent on us to help educate them. One thing is to understand the regulation, but a second thing is to actually understand, like, how does that put into practice in a particular place? Like, for instance, high tax rates in some markets might mean that a part of your compensation would be grocery store credits or gasoline credits. That's very common in Mexico, for instance, or break policies or leave policies, making sure that clients really understand that. And in fact, to the earlier question around how do we support workers in country, we actually ask that our clients let all HR related conversations actually go through us or be advised by us, because it's really critical to keep yourself out of hot water in a country that you have someone who's expert, fundamentally understands the law, but then also how that turns into practice.
Well, and I mean, having worked for global companies my entire career, I can say that the HR departments are not knowledgeable, at least at headquarters, what's going on around the world. And when you deal with the local HR, they're just not really connected to corporate, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And so I would think of Dell when we worked for Dell, and my entire development team was in Malaysia. So I was navigating employee relationships in Malaysia, which culturally was very different. And, you know, not that I'm proud of it, got myself into a little bit of hot water because I said something that I shouldn't have. And they're like, oh, culture, you can't say that. I'm like, yeah, but nobody ever talked to us about that as being somebody who's leading from the US and managing locally.
I think in defense of HR practitioners all over the world,
yeah, please.
I think that the challenge is that we expect a lot out of HR practitioners, and it's a lot of understanding the technical knowledge of how you do HR, perform HR in a particular market, versus what is the business requirement and how do you meld the two?
Right.
And I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, which is that even how you elicit the best performance out of people, or where they will view satisfaction and how they do the job, and therefore you keep them longer, or your retention is better, et cetera. Oftentimes you have to understand what is the how is the educational system in a country. Like, so for instance, education systems that are more focused on rote learning and less on critical thinking, you oftentimes people who are great doers, but they don't necessarily feel as comfortable thinking for themselves.
Right.
Or countries that are extremely hierarchical, getting that person to share an idea that they might have that might be the game changing idea.
Right.
Sometimes it's often hard to do. I've found that having run operations in various countries, oftentimes you have to work within those challenges, and then you as a leader have to figure out what is the best way to elicit ideas, the best thinking, how you keep people engaged in the work that they do. And oftentimes it's going to take very different things.
So that made me think of, as you're talking about this, when you hire or you get hired from your client to say, hey, I need somebody in these locations, and you guys look at the job description, do you kind of talk about that? Hey, like, this culture isn't a culture that's going to challenge you. So then you're looking kind of for a needle in a haystack when you recruit for some of those positions based on what they need, because you are dealing at times with that cultural boundary. We can pick on Japan. I remember my first meeting in Japan, everybody's in the room nodding. And I said, oh, that went great. They're like, no, that's the culture. They nod and they're agreeing with you and they're polite, but they don't agree potentially with what you're saying. So you have to get confirmation. You have to do it very differently, right? So do you help customers navigate that cultural difference?
Absolutely. Well, yes, for sure. And typically we would do that with a local expert who might talk an organization through. Now, one thing that's important is that EORs generally actually don't hire. One thing that Atlas HXM does up front is we help clients understand where talent is available and how difficult or easy it will be to attract that talent in a particular market. And in fact, going beyond that, what's a compensation and a benefits package that's going to be attractive to those individuals? Okay. That's maybe a little bit unusual in our business because our business grew very quickly during the pandemic. Lots of people displaced, lots of companies wanting to make sure that they kept access to those people. And so we've really invested in a lot of upfront workforce planning with our clients to make sure that they know exactly what they're getting into. Right. And we look at it from the perspective of what's the total cost of ownership versus also what are the opportunities and the challenges with a workforce. Right. So as an example, another challenge in hiring in Japan for US companies is that a lot of Japanese don't speak English. So levels of fluency in English, for instance, are much higher in China than they are in Japan. And so sometimes that can create a bit of friction, because in almost every single case for us, where our clients are largely US, UK, Canada based organizations, to a lesser extent, Greater China, English is almost always the lingua franca. So understanding levels of English is very important. So one of the things that we have to do is help our clients understand what are the things you want to screen for, and make sure that you identify that candidate to set them up for success long-term in the role.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Jim, I'm wondering, what advice do you give to people? Like, what's your number one piece of advice for companies who are doing this first time? What do you tell them?
Yeah, number one is,
this is a lot.
ask the questions, listen to the individual, listen to what your partner is saying, and really you should expect your EOR provider to act as a partner when it comes to deploying and engaging those employees in the long term. It's absolutely critical. That's why we focused on what we call is for people by people approach, which is that we know that when you call HR, it's usually something either very sensitive or very urgent. It's not often that an individual, an employee, calls HR. And so we want to make sure that that person is supported by someone who is in region, speaks their language, which also reduces a lot of confusion, and gets them to an answer as quickly as possible. So it's the exact same thing for our clients. When part of our selling process is, let's pull in the experts in the particular region to make sure that you understand all the nuances of what you're doing in a market. A perfect example is looking at tax policy. So when you're an expat, what are the things that you need to think about for taxation? So some countries in Europe are oftentimes can be a bit more challenging when it comes to overall employment practice. Spain is a great example, but as an expat, Spain is a terrific location. So what does that mean for like a local hire versus an expat hire? There are pretty significant differences. And so for a client that's looking to expand, ask that EOR the question, and I would ask it a very open-ended question, is, if you were us, what would you do to set our team up for success? And then that really demonstrates what is the long-term value you're going to get out of that organization as a partner.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's talk about, you talked about the pandemic and expanding rapidly. So building this global team and building Atlas up, I mean, that's a big undertaking. So talk to us about, when you're building a global team, what you look for and what it looks like for you internally to build that team.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. The first thing that I look for is, I look to hire people that are used to working in global teams. Because I'm sure you can appreciate this from your time in Malaysia. In fact, I remember you flying back and forth. A small misunderstanding in language can sometimes blow up to something that it never really should have been.
Right.
It could have been something very easy to clear up. So it's really important that you, as you're building a global team, that you look for people that understand the challenges of communication in multiple languages, even to the point where, if you are a native English speaker and you are speaking to a large group, that you slow down your cadence so that everyone understands what you're saying. So communication, understanding of how global organizations work are absolutely fundamental. From a technical perspective, it becomes a little bit harder to evaluate someone's technical capability if they're outside of your home country. So how am I to know that this is the best employment layer that you're going to find in France? Well, in that case, as someone who is hiring, what you do then is you look to say, what are the experiences that they've had? What are the kinds of organizations? And knowing what you know about those cultures, did they last a long time at those organizations? And that is also a really good indicator of whether someone's going to be a very good fit. You know, certain companies, Accenture is a great example of a company that people that have come from Accenture understand how global business generally works, and they tend to work really well in cross-functional, multi-function teams that might be in a lot of different locations. And even if they're not a native English speaker, that they've communicated and worked in English as a common language. So those are some of the things that I look for in particular as I'm hiring and adding staff globally.
And you manage staff across the globe. So how do you deal with cultural differences? I mean, I know you're a native English speaker, but you speak multiple languages, so I'm sure that helps you navigate many countries as well. But how do you kind of deal with the cultural aspect of all that?
It's it's a I put myself in the position of, if I were that person, how would I want to be communicated with? And it's hard to do that at scale, but at least if you could think about the way people interact. And I'll give you a great example of this. For my colleagues in Latin America, they don't start an email with, "Hey, can you do such and such?" It's far more courteous. "How was your day? Hope you had a nice weekend." And when they get a response back that doesn't ask those same questions of them, it's almost offensive. And so it took me a little while to kind of figure that out. But I look for patterns in how people communicate, and then I try to mirror those patterns back. So if you ask me how I am, and I'll say fine or great or ready for the day to be over or whatever it is, I'll also ask those questions back of people. So what I like to do is kind of not parrot, but like almost mirror the experience that someone gives you in the way they communicate with you. Second thing is, for us, every holiday is now your holiday. So we celebrate Holi, we celebrate Ramadan, we celebrate all of the holidays, and make sure that we're communicating to people that we know how important it is for them, and that we're very respectful of them having that time to celebrate, either if it's with a family or whatever it is. Or so that's another thing that we do. And then the other thing is, because it's important for an organization to hear lots of voices, not just the voice of the CEO. And so, and to me, those voices are not just the CEO and the CEO's direct reports, but it's their direct reports and their direct reports, and an individual who's working on the line, that they have an opportunity, that their work is vetted, that their work, that people get an understanding of how their work is, because there's no better way to be able to work together as a team unless you have like that fundamental want of understanding how they do what they do, why they do it a certain way. And so that's something I try and reinforce. As a leader, the more questions you ask, the better. It's like the best sellers. The best sellers ask a lot of questions, and they do more listening than they do talking. And I feel like as leaders, we really have to put ourselves in that mind frame as well.
Yeah, I like that you talked about not just you and your directs, because I feel like a lot of people will say, well, I never get airtime. I worked on this massive project and nobody ever asked me about it, or nobody ever gave me the credit. And I find it odd that there isn't that platform. And my old EVP at Salesforce, we had a leadership council, and the leadership council was not his directs, but it was his directs. He's like, I have SVPs in the field who don't report to me, but need to weigh in on the strategy. They need to understand what is coming out of this body. And so we used it as an opportunity to do just that. Hey, let me share with you, let you weigh in, let me hear your voice. Because if not, then it becomes hierarchical.
I know we're gonna talk about scale later, at a corporate level. But if you think about an individual organization, if every decision is made at the top, there is no scale. There's no ability to scale.
No.
You have to figure out ways to push decision making further down into the organization. Now, some of that's trust, some of that is capability, and some of that is teaching and learning. So are you teaching and giving people the kind of the framework, if you will, to make decisions? But if you can't push decision making down into an organization, you're really always going to hamstring your ability to scale the organization.
Right.
Jim, I'm wondering on that. Do you have challenges with different cultures getting that feedback? Because we all know that feedback loop is so critical. But how do you deal with getting that with people who are across many countries and maybe who have a different way of thinking when it comes to getting that good feedback that is so rich to leadership?
Yeah, sure, Andy. I think this is where, back to my defense of the HR professional, this is where a really good HR team is actually an incredible advocate, because ideally what they're doing is they're providing you with a regular pulse of the organization. So I have a terrific CHRO who will say things to me like, I know what you heard was this, but let me tell you what that actually means. And I'll say, well, how did you get that? Well, I had a sidebar conversation because I'm accustomed to how this particular group of people, because sometimes it's not only from country to country, it's also from function to function within an organization too. Right. And so that's where, like, that is some of the best strategic partnership work that an HR group can do, is actually taking off the varnish, if you will, and giving you a clear view of what's actually happening in an organization.
Right. So you touched upon scaling the organization. Lot goes into scaling an organization, from startup to this, even in the global companies entering new markets or evolving their processes. So what do you think it takes to actually scale, more so when it comes to your workforce?
So you can't really scale unless you have job responsibilities very well defined. And then what you do is you start to match that to, you kind of build ratios through the organization. So in order to get to X revenue, I need this many sales people producing this sort of sales return. That creates this many people to be, in our case, this many people to be onboarded as new worksite employees. That's what we affectionately call the people that we employ on behalf of our clients. And then how many people does it take to support them in different functional areas? So that is going to translate into X number of payroll specialists, X number of benefits specialists, right, X number of HR generalists. Likewise, you'll need this size of a finance team, this size of a legal team, et cetera, to support the business. So I think when you understand the functions that need to take place or that need to happen, that gives you a better idea for, like, a volume relationship to what you need. And then I think where you go next is you say, all right, what are jobs that I need to hire for in the market, or what are jobs that I can train for? Mm-hmm. Because ideally what we're doing, and also very importantly, what are jobs that functionally can be handled by a system? Mm-hmm. Because we will talk about in AI. This discussion, yep. AI and automation in general, sure. and what that does. But what that does is that gives you an ability to prioritize what are the things I need to automate versus what are the things that I always want a human to be present in the transaction. Right. And my goal is 100% of our team is client worksite employee facing most of their day. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of organizations still struggle with that. So when I think about kind of a scaling strategy for us, technology being a really critical part of that, yeah. What I'm looking at is what are the things that are non-client facing, and therefore not necessarily low value, but of lower value when it comes to committing to our mission of creating that ideal human experience for remote workforce.
So when you talk about hiring and you talk about scaling, you said something about how many people and the culture. Do you ever advise your clients that why would you hire? Why wouldn't you automate?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. Yeah. Sometimes that does come up in conversation. It is kind of a funny question. It's would you work yourself out of a job?
Right.
Which is a legitimate question, and a lot of our clients are having that discussion. More often than not, what we're doing is our clients have actually already had those discussions internally and said, here are the things we think we can automate, but here are the things that we don't think we can. And more often than not, they're asking us, what's the best location to hire for these particular skills? So that comes back to the workforce planning that we do up front. Yeah.
Before we move to kind of AI transformation, I want to ask you a question about rising to CEO. And I use this example a number of times. There was a C-level executive that used to work at Salesforce, worked at a number of companies, and he was recently interviewed on a podcast saying, as I came up in my career, I often wouldn't raise my hand in the room because I was afraid if I challenged the said executive or said leader, I'd get fired. And I, started developing imposter syndrome, which we all know is real. And only until I got to, comfortable at that C level did I really start challenging it. And what went through my mind is, geez, if you felt that way, even when you had the C-level title, and all people just look at C-level titles like they know more than me. They're smarter than me because they're there. I believe it's just because they're more politically savvy in most cases, not always smarter than. So coming up, imposter syndrome, was it tough to see yourself in the seat and take that role and take that responsibility?
I think that I don't always trust people that don't have a little bit of imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is the thing that drives you to be better all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that growing up as a gay kid, you always had to, you felt somehow you were different, and therefore you had to excel at every single thing. And I think a lot of that drove me early in my career. But I think that ultimately testing and trial by fire and being able to be having a few successes and failures under your belt, it really helps you to understand, okay, if I have the opportunity to be, at a different level in my professional career, what are the things that I would do and what are the things that I wouldn't do? And a lot of it's environmental, let's face it. I mean, we're a PE funded company. Decisions that we make as a PE funded company versus Atlas historically was owned by a single individual, they'd change. You would make different kinds of decisions. But I think for me, career-wise, as I said, I don't always think I'm a great career planner. What I do is I look to, and this is my advice to anyone, is look to do the things that you haven't done so that when you have that opportunity to up level, that you have the experience and the understanding of how other functions work, how people in those functions think. And so for me, I very deliberately, once in my career, took a role in a technology company that probably wasn't the perfect fit for me, but it was exactly the experience that I needed. Yeah. And I looked at the experiences that I had and was able to bring something good to that organization based on my history. The same thing in this role. And it's funny because even during the recruiting process, one of the questions was, well, you've never been a CEO before. And I said, well, yes, but I've run organizations 10 times the size of this one. Right. And now I understand that questioning, which was sure, I ran large organizations within an even larger organization, but I'd never had HR report to me. I'd never had finance report to me. And these were all new experiences. Right. So a little bit of that, yes, comes into play in I guess a form of imposter syndrome. But right. Maybe we should rebrand it from imposter syndrome to that like that nervous energy that you bring to a new role when you want to be able to excel, and a lot of people are depending on you, frankly. Right. And so to me, the way I manage it is I think there are decisions no decision I'm going to make is going to crater the company. And if that's the case, then my investors probably made a bad hiring decision. But I can make decisions that will alter the course of the organization. And so you have to have a little bit of confidence and take a little bit of risk as a leader. But then also your job, and this is where the politicking comes in, is you shore up the support around you by good change management. And frankly, let's face it, it's politicking. It's helping to understand who are the people impacted, what's the outcome for them, how do you explain why that's a good outcome for them, and that's pretty much what you do as a leader all day long. Yeah, most people, politicking was a big thing at Salesforce. Everyone's like, I hate the politicking. All our yearly surveys every year were like, too much politicking. Yeah. And I think the way you described it is a little different because there's a level of empathy that you talked about in that. And I don't think most people feel like politics actually comes with that level of empathy. Yeah. Right? Self-promotion is grandstanding. It's not politicking. Well, politicking is shaking hands and kissing babies. It's getting out to know people, understanding your constituents, what are the things that they need, working on a balance of how do you meet the needs of as many constituents as possible. That's politicking. And to me, okay, it sounds pejorative, but the reality is it's not. The actual act of getting out and getting to understand all of the constituents you support is actually a really good thing.
Right.
So that's, again, another kind of, corporate culture thing that probably needs to be rebranded. But yeah, I don't have a lot of time for grandstanders. And yes, I appreciate those who promote people around them as opposed to self-promote.
Right.
But then on occasion, it's okay to say, hey, I did that. And yeah, look at me for a second.
Well, I think that's the fact is nothing is ever done individual, right? There's nothing in my career I can think to. Maybe I created that deck, right? But it was certainly from ideas and concepts and input from other people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk about AI and move on to AI. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I would love to kick it off because I've got so many questions here. AI is showing up everywhere, and HR and workforce. Whether you're in HR or whether we're talking about HR functions, or whether we're talking about functions across the organization that HR has to help us manage. So I'm wondering, where are you actually seeing AI have the biggest impact? In workforce management today? Where are you seeing the effects?
Yeah. Oh gosh, Andy, this is a great question. So we just did a brief internal survey for a board meeting that we had in Q4, and we basically, we have our enterprise Claude licenses and ChatGPT licenses, and so we use it in a lot of day-to-day work, but I didn't realize that we had 19 separate initiatives going on in the country to automate some process that was happening. And some of the things that we deal with in HR professionals, know payroll is notoriously difficult to calculate. So a lot of the AI work that's happening and that we're seeing that's making a difference, at least in the lives of HR professionals, is things to automate the gross to net calculation. So what are you paid versus what's collected in taxes, what's remitted to governments, et cetera. So that's one big area. Secondly is just our development cycles are speeding up, and it's remarkable. I read an article in Axios, and I'm seeing this play out in real life in Atlas, which is that your tech debt almost disappears as you start to switch to using Claude for programming and development. Right. It's really incredible that the output of our product and technology team has gone up dramatically since. So that's another big thing that I'm seeing. So if you think about it, all of the systems that you use in human capital management, the data is super sensitive, tons of PII, lots of security protocols needed. Lots of manual processes where there are opportunities to screw up data. And so what we're seeing is like a huge cleanup of that whole aspect of the way we manage our workforce is around clean data, good results, using AI to analyze and look for predictors, like, for instance, things like, can you predict if you're going to have turnover because of some behavior that you've had? Can you predict that you might have challenges around pay raises or something anything along those lines? You can start to use AI now to help you think through strategies. The other aspect that we're seeing from where AI is really making a big difference is thinking through complex issues, synthesizing a lot of data really fast, and helping you to come up with, here ideally is your hiring plan, here is a hiring profile, here is actually a job description of the next candidate that you need to hire that's going to help advance your business. And I'm really kind of optimistic. We could look at a negative case of AI leading to job displacement, and probably that will happen on some level. But on the other hand, it also helps us get much more efficient and more creative in the ways we address other problems. And so ideally then what happens is you start to shift your workforce into much more client-focusing product development sort of activities, because your kind of day-to-day starts to get much more automated through use of AI.
Yeah. So sorry, go on, Andy.
I was going to say, one of the things I saw on your website, you guys had a great report out. And one of the things I saw was your research saying that that AI isn't eliminating work as much as it is challenging the kind of skills
Yep.
that companies are bringing in and valuing. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing in terms of those new skills that are critical for that success in the future AI-driven state?
Yeah, Andy, and thanks for the shout out to the report. The report it has a lot of really cool data in it around how companies are thinking about global expansion, and it's free and available on our website. But so when we look at AI skill sets, the fundamental skill set that you're looking for is a prompt coder. What we have seen in our business is not as much demand for prompt coders outside of kind of the country of origin. So generally what we're seeing is people are tending to hire them closer to home. They're hiring them. It's almost like they're replicating an in-person scrum in many ways, because you want to be able to have a team that's vibing and working together on tackling a particular problem. What we're seeing is as companies are adopting more, we believe that ultimately they will want to look to hire more prompt coders outside of their home jurisdiction. And that'll follow basically cost of talent. So there are certain markets that we think will emerge. We're starting to see them in all over Latin America, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, all being very important markets. Increasingly, a lot of African countries are promoting visas that allow, kind of like global nomad visas, because they're trying to attract that kind of talent to come work there. So what we think will happen is that you'll have an individual who can choose a lifestyle, but then deliver that job from wherever the work, wherever they can do the work, wherever they can get the appropriate visa to live. But prompt coders are going to be a really critical skill set. I think that in general, though, it's shifting the way companies are thinking about hiring in other functions and the types of people so that they would hire. So they're looking for much more technical skills, and they're looking for people that can actually teach LLMs how to do particular kinds of work. So we've seen companies emerge, and then all they do is they hire professionals all over the world who are basically teaching an LLM how to be an accountant, teaching an LLM how to be an attorney, how to evaluate red lines in a contract, how to what to do when your accounts receivable balances go up. So we'll see a lot of that. There will be a lot of general employment around how to teach LLMs basic critical functions that happen within an organization.
So your message to the world is it's not doom and gloom. You're looking at the glass half full, that we're going to be shifting our workforce to a different way of working.
That's my opinion.
Sure.
Will there be displacement? Yes. And will there be people impacted by that? Yes. And will that cause pain? Yes. But my advice, because I do get a chance to talk to a lot of new grads, is think about your skill set in a kind of in a nonlinear way. That you should learn as much about your skill as you can in the periphery, so that whatever happens, whatever transpires in the advancement of technology, that you will be relevant no matter what evolves. So if you think about it, didn't we have the same scare with when chatbots emerged, that employment would change? And certainly I would suspect, if you did a study, global employment is down significantly for contact center type of roles. On the other hand, as consumers, a lot of us appreciate that, right? It's like it's easier to get an answer to something. Sure. So then what happens is then companies put more into experience. So the employment has simply shifted. It's shifted from a contact center into more of a brick and mortar experience. And in fact, I was reading recently that a number of the largest banks in the US are actually expanding branches again. I mean, that hasn't happened in years.
Right.
Because can't you do everything online? Well, sure, except you can't have a person-to-person experience.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot is, we had a couple of people on the podcast recently who really kind of leaned into that, that as we move further into technology, and technology kind of leading the way, is this need to almost shift back to hey, I want to touch people. I want to shake hands. I want to be this. And I think that it's interesting because there's so much of this, oh, I don't want to go back to the office, where you've made me remote. I am now officially remote, and I think people want that interaction. And so I'm wondering, when you think about those roles that come through and you talked a little bit earlier about human in the loop, human out of the loop, right? How do you guys look at that? So you said, hey, we can do all this stuff with Claude. How are you shifting your workforce to say, and kind of give guidance around what your workforce looks like to say, hey guys, these roles are more important and I want to transition my company to have more of these roles, whereas I want to automate this stuff.
Yeah.
But I always want that check and balance, kind of the system does it, but there's kind of a human always like, yep, that's right. Not that they're just checking a box, but
a check and balance. Well, I guess the way I would look at it is certainly our development team is using Claude. And what I'm actually finding is that it's unleashing a lot of creativity. Because instead of like building code, they're not having to do that anymore. They're actually thinking about, oh, what are some other nuances of this client problem that we're trying to figure out? In terms of them thinking about client-facing activity, then that gives our developers are often a part of our sales call, at least at a minimum, our product managers, to talk about feature functionality as a part of our sale, but then also listen for what is the client looking to do something different that maybe we haven't offered before, and how could we quickly accelerate a development cycle so that we can add that functionality. Where I kind of liken it to the music industry. So artists don't make very much money on recording anymore. Where they make all their money is in touring. And so because what is it? They've created an experience that's much more immersive than just simply, yes, I can hear you, listen to you on, well, who listens to the radio anymore? I can listen to you on a streaming service, or I could, Apple Music or whatever it is, whatever the vehicle is. But instead, artists are like forced to like really like push the boundaries of creativity to create these immersive experiences that where ticket prices would have been a couple of $100 pre-pandemic. Now you're looking at artists that can easily command several $1,000s for a ticket.
I mean, Taylor Swift obviously she became a billionaire just off music.
Yeah.
Which is, to your point, unheard of, but that was mostly through the success of that tour,
and has created multiple millionaires, people that were on the tour with her.
Right.
And so I look at that model and I say, okay, yeah, I'm in HR services. It's certainly not as glamorous as music recording and performance. But on the other hand, what are the things that we can learn from that? You create a personal connection with the artist. You are a net promoter. If you're a fan, clearly you're going to be a 9 or 10 on the net promoter score.
Right.
What are the things that we can do in our business to make sure that we engender that kind of loyalty? I'm trying to think of some other examples, but
but you're building that community.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
It is. It's the surprise and delight factor.
We had an event for some of our clients and some prospective clients just last week, and it was so evident to me, the discussion around the room, that the value of the knowledge that we can bring is great, but the value of the community of knowledge that we had in the room together was magnified everything that we could do.
Right.
Significantly more than anything we could do as one single company. And I believe that is the role of the modern company, is to figure out how you create networks of that are sometimes your organization, but sometimes other organizations entirely, to really bring the best point of view on how to get something done for your end client. And if you can do that, where you don't have to own every single component of it, you can work with multiple organizations to be able to deliver the best outcome. That's a winner. That's a successful formula.
Yeah, I agree. And we, in our business, partner with a lot of different people because, selling is more complicated. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there are, especially in consulting, there are people who are looking for that skill set and you may not have it. And we all know the old adage, what they used to say about consultants is, oh, they just, read an article in Time magazine or, and you're an expert, right? Like you just need to read the bullet points and,
Sure.
and go in and talk about it and fake it till you make it. But there is something to be said about that cross-functional community that kind of ebbs and flows into those deep, areas of expertise and allow people to kind of shine with what they do. And I wonder, as we move into AI and companies maybe start downsizing, that this expertise now becomes these independent pods of consultants or whomever who now are SWAT teams. Hey, I'm going to come in and fix this for you, and then I'm going to go away and I'm going to go fix it over here for this person, and then I'm going to go fix it over there. And if that won't provide more career satisfaction, than some people who just stay at the company because I need the benefits and I need this and I need that. And so it's safe. And so I'm going to do the safe thing.
Yeah. Well, let me rebrand the consulting from that perspective.
You're rebranding everything today.
I know, I think so. But so, I've been in situations where I've read one article, maybe not in Time magazine, but, maybe The Economist, maybe People. That's, not outside of the realm of possibilities. And then have had to opine on something relative to that. But the skill set of a consultant is, I understand what you're trying to get done. I saw what someone else tried to do, and I can see what worked and didn't work, and I can figure out a way to communicate that to you. So any lesson learned can be something that's going to help you avoid pitfalls in the future. Right. So to me, that's kind of the highest value that a consultant brings, which is that level of synthesis of lots of data points, which is, if you think about it, in some respects, that's kind of what AI can do. But until you can put it in words that I can understand, then it's kind of valueless. And that's where why I think consultants can be exceptionally successful and exceptionally valuable to a company. And I think that, companies that are shy away from using consultants, I think that the expectation you can have is that person is really like a librarian, a synthesizer of knowledge, someone who pulls together lots of stories to be able to help you create a path based on the wisdom of others.
Yeah.
Even if it comes from People magazine.
Right. You talked about empathy earlier, and there's a lot of discussion that AI doesn't have empathy. And that's kind of one of the downfalls, right? But they said, oh, it's just a matter of time. So do you think, so I guess let's fast forward. I read this book, I mean, it has to be 4 years ago, and it was called 2030. And it was funny you brought up Africa, because they said by 2030, the employment labor will shift from China, India, Vietnam, and Africa is really the untapped location for upcoming talent.
Yep.
So when you think about AI and you think about the global workforce and you think about not, because Americans are American-centric, right? We don't think about other countries the way we think about America. So in 2030, if you had to, make a bet, and we're going to come back in 2030 and re-interview you on these bets, what do you think the world looks like in terms of labor force?
Yep.
And then do you think AI will shift it more so in industrial, like mature countries like America, Canada, UK, versus countries like Africa?
Well, I think AI has the possibility to be a real equalizer globally around purchasing power and quality of life, frankly. I mean, if you think about Africa, I mean, part of the main reason is that you have the best demographics in terms of the population is growing. It's certainly growing faster than, say, China, Western Europe, even India. The birth rate is coming down significantly. So, like, ultimately, those countries will stop. They'll have to rely more on technical innovation to keep productivity growing, because they won't be able to rely on kind of like just a naturally evolving workforce. And so what you have in Africa you have rapidly improving education systems. You have a whole generation of young people who can skip legacy technologies and they immediately move right to the newest technologies. You have a population that has and you've seen this over and over, even in the fintech space in Africa. I mean, they were mobile well before a lot of the world was. You see this in Brazil. You know, necessity is the mother of invention. In Brazil, you have some of the best payment systems around because hyperinflation was to a point where you could get paid on Friday. If you didn't deposit the check on Monday, it was worth half its value. And so, like, Brazil really quickly evolved some of the best payment systems in the world. So you see that happening. And to me, it gives me hope that what you're going to have is you won't have just one region of the world is the knowledge workers and one region of the world is the agricultural workers and one region is just extractive industries, but rather what you're going to see is a blend of all of them. And in some respects, that's kind of what's happening in the US economy right now. Yes, manufacturing is not really growing as you know, this administration would like. A lot of that's competitive advantage, meaning like you have more skilled workforce in other parts of the world. But at a minimum, but we haven't lost manufacturing altogether in the United States. And so eventually what you'll have is I believe a situation where you just have it's much more egalitarian the way work is distributed. And I like to think that Atlas plays some small role in that because we're able to facilitate this global employment culture, and for organizations that are looking to find the best person in no matter where they live, you know, yes, hallelujah, we want to speak with you. But also what that does is, and the way we talk about it internally is we're really democratizing work insofar as we're making it so much more accessible to do jobs without moving. You don't have to have global mobility necessarily to give people access to better and better jobs where they can continue to improve their quality of life.
Well, I mean, that's an argument. One of the parts of this book talked about micro cities and saying, to your point, quality of life. And so you think about the argument that has been held in the United States is like, well, why does Amazon pick Seattle, California, New York? Why don't they do it in Iowa, in Nebraska, and allow people to come and have a quality of life, buy a home for $200,000 and, you know, let their kids walk to the general store, you know, kind of this nostalgic view of the world. But people gravitate towards the coasts, and it's the coastal elites, and the middle of the United States is just kind of forgotten. And it's either it's manufacturing or, you know, historic industry. But these kind of tech companies aren't seeing that as a viable option and saying, hey, you can go live the life you want, just go live it here.
Yeah. I think return to office policies are some of the most misguided policies that many companies have embarked on.
Why?
Because it defeats the purpose of exactly what you just said. There are lots of places, even in the United States, where you can have a much better quality of life at a much lower cost with shorter commute times or no commute times. All of those things enhance your quality of life overall.
Right.
And return to office has basically forced people into more time spent on commuting. And not all cultures are really designed to be able to have that make much of a difference. There are some companies where, yes, being together, some organizations being together is better for the organization overall. But I think you have to be really deliberate about what are the functions that you want to be together, and that when you apply the return to office policies, this kind of a generalization over every single skill, you end up with a lot of people that simply take the work that they were doing at home and probably more efficient at home, and you put them in an office where they spend an hour to come into the office, and then it takes another hour for them to get home, and they're simply sitting in a cube and they're still on video conference calls.
Oh yeah.
It's unbelievable when I walk into offices now and you see the number of people that are on video calls, that it's like, well, wait a minute, didn't we bring you back to work so that everyone can work together? I just think it's not that simple anymore. Right. And especially when those policies are kind of like just painted broad brush across every employee in an organization. prior to Atlas, even though it's a smaller team, we almost entirely work virtually. We have 3 offices, maybe 25 people come into them on a regular basis. And oftentimes it's because it's just a better environment for them to be able to have, better Wi-Fi access or those sorts of things. But because we promote global work, it would really be anathema for us to say everyone has to come into an office. So that just wouldn't make a whole ton of sense. But prior to here, I've managed organizations with 3,000 people that we've been entirely virtual.
Yeah.
And again, back to necessity is the mother of invention. Because people didn't get to see each other all the time, like we really quickly adapted social media to be able to stay in touch with each other. And so that we were able to replicate that feeling of like shooting the breeze with someone in the cafeteria through social media. And so you don't necessarily have to have return to office to make an organization more productive, but you can think about your processes and how people communicate with each other. And to get the same effect.
Okay, well, we talked about the 2030. What is the one shift that you would say leaders need to make when they think about their workforce over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so the major shift is skills-based hiring is going to be absolutely critical, especially when so much work will be able to get accomplished through AI and through agentic AI in particular. So what I mean by that is that the talent that you hire for a particular job now, they're going to need to be able to shift their skill set much more quickly. And so the way I think about it, I'm trying to think about 5 years out from now, what is this work likely to look like? And does this person have the core skills that no matter what happens from an automation perspective, they're still going to be relevant to the business? So those would be things like, are they good communicators? Their ability to socialize with clients, and by socialize I mean what is their interaction style like with clients? What are the things that motivate and drive them? And then fundamentally, what are the technical talents that they've been trained in, and then how can they bring those to the fore? So I think skills-based hiring is going to be absolutely critical. That is number one. I think the second thing is that business leaders are going to need to constantly think about total cost of ownership. So where is the work getting done, and is it the best value place? So basically, it's taking the economic concept of comparative advantage to the knowledge workforce. And we're seeing lots more companies think about that. Like, if I needed to hire 30 staff accountants, because these are processes that I can't automate, I need judgment is required, and I need to complement them with attorneys. Where's the best location that I can find this whole mix of resources? Because I want them, even if they're not coming into an office every day, I want them to be able to see each other once in a while.
Right.
And so I think that's another critical thing. So number one, skills-based hiring. Number two, total cost of ownership, meaning like, where is the person? What are the prevailing pay rates, et cetera? And then I think the third is something that's been something that's really been kind of emerging, which is that companies are becoming much more trusted than governments in many places. And so organizations are really going to have to think about how they take positions on particular topics. So what do they stand for? So for instance, we know that DEI is not in vogue right now at the moment, but it's something that we're committed to an organization because we know as an organization it makes us better. And this is not about because we think this is the right thing to do. Yeah, we do think it's the right thing to do, is to be an inclusive organization. But being inclusive begets diversity. It begets an organization that creates equity for all of the people within an organization. And for us, it really matters because as a global organization in particular, those are the core values that help you to function as a good global organization. So as leaders, we've had to take stands on, it might not be popular at the moment, or many companies don't want to talk about it, but it's something that we know that we need to be successful and we need to take a position on it.
Yeah.
So corporate leader as policy influencer, I think is going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, that's interesting. So final question, what's Atlas look like in the next 12 months? What are you hyper focused on to get done at Atlas?
So we have just completed, I would say, a major transformation in our business. Our founder, who established the company over 10 years ago, had decided he wanted to move on to some other things. So we had an opportunity to really take a look at the structure of the organization. We have basically put ourselves in a position where we have an industry that there are a lot of smaller providers, all are fairly subscale. And so what we're trying to think about is like, how do we become the leader in encouraging what could be the next evolution of the business? And so for us, most of our focus is on growth. How do we continue to grow with the clients that we currently support? How do we continue to support new clients? So sales. That's the main agenda item for every CEO. We're left with a great legacy of compliance. So that's something that we feel very good about. But the regulation globally is emerging very quickly. And so that's something that is really important for us to stay ahead of. And so we're now starting to work with some government regulators in select countries to help inform kind of what should be best practice for how EORs operate in their countries. So that's another thing. And then I think the third thing is an organization that's gone through a lot of transition. Oftentimes you just need a period of stability.
Right.
So is creating a little calmness for people so that we can focus on growth, we can continue to scale up, and that we're doing that all the while also thinking about what are the things that we can take off people's plate to help them get more in front of clients, more in front of our worksite employees, and that's going to be really driven by what we're doing with AI.
Yeah, as is everybody. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it. And we'll keep on following Atlas and all the great things you guys are doing.
Great. Thanks, Rich and Andy. It was great to be with you both.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
1, 2,